Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on climate change and media literacy. Today, we'll be here for around 2 hours from 5 to 7 p.m. And we will be recording this event, which will be available shortly on YouTube. So, thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a good experience tonight with us. Here, we have a short QR code for you to check in with us. So, to start out the webinar, introducing ourselves, my name is Julia, and I am a lead analyst and project manager at Spyros. Spyros is a company based in Malmo. Specifically, we are a social enterprise, so we are a company with a social mission. We collaborate transnationally through mainly European co-funded projects with other companies, civil society, universities, and also authorities to bring out and develop interesting trainings that can help out in skill building and awareness raising in different fields. Today, I'll be joined by Merle, my colleague, who is also a project coordinator here at Swedes. So, to introduce the why of what we're here today, we are here through the ECOlitAct project, which is short for Ecoliteracy and Green Education for Climate Action. ECOlitAct is an Erasmus Plus project that is co funded by the European Union, and it is a transnational collaboration of five partners that I'm going to get into very soon. The project seeks to empower vet practitioners, educators, and also vet learners to count misinformation related to environment and climate change and to inspire them to adopt eco friendly behaviors and attitudes. Through the project, we'll be developing digital green education and training opportunities, as well as material embracing eco literacy, which we define as media and information literacy applied to ecology and climate change. We also hope to support, or like we aim to support, climate action by inspiring critical thinking, developing digital and media and information literacy skills, and encouraging attitude and behavior shifts. So we're going to have through the project these two approaches on more specific skills development and also attitude and behavior change. The project lasts for 30 months, starting last December and going until June 2025. Through the project, as I introduced a little bit before, we have three main results that we're gonna work on. The first one is already ongoing and it's almost finished, which is a toolkit that is gonna address media information literacy, critical thinking, and digital skills, and also promote eco-friendly behaviors and attitudes through different open educational resources and scenarios that are practical activities to be used in educational context. We're also going to develop a handbook, which is going to contain digital lessons addressing similar topics as a toolkit. And finally, we're going to develop an educational structure, which is going to be based on a self assessment tool for the learners to understand their own skills and competence needs and then to be able to select their individualized education. So, as I introduced before, we are five partners in this project. So, we have Swedes, us here in Sweden, Iberica in Germany, ACP in Greece, LUV in Slovenia, and Egina in Italy. So, why are we here today? So, to answer this question, I collected a little bit of information that shows why it's so important to talk a lot about media and information literacy and how we consume information online in regard to how we see climate change and climate action. So, although the number of people who actually believe in Europe that social networks are trustworthy, and that the number is only 35%, more than 50% of adults in Portugal, Poland, Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, Slovakia, and Croatia said that they got their news on social media, which is a very different output. According to the results of a study held in 2022 as well, over 20% of news consumers in Brazil, India, Pakistan, and the United States reported they believed they saw false information about climate change in online media. Then, more specifically about the use of information, although we know that social media platforms can be important locations for discussion and debate of climate change to emerge, there are two sides of it. Where while they can have a democratizing potential, they can also accelerate political polarization. Also, media shapes the public discourse about climate change and how to respond to it. The UN's Intergovernmental Panel of Experts on Climate Change, the IPCC, warned about this very same topic. And according to them, the shaping power of social media can be both useful and then empowering to accelerate climate mitigation, but it can also do the exact opposite and generate more climate denialism in opposition to climate change mitigation. So, to introduce a little bit how this webinar is going to look like, remembering again, this will be recorded and you'll be able to find that later on YouTube. Then we're going to start our panel discussion, which we're going to have specific questions for the panelists. All panelists were also going to have a chance to respond to the questions that have not been directly asked to them. Then by the end of it, we're going to have some closing reflections, and if we have time, some also general questions for all the panelists. Then after that, we're going to have a quick Q&A that all of you are going to have time to engage with the panelists and ask your own questions. And if you're not happy with talking in the recorded event, it's okay. You can also write your question down on the chat, and then I will ask for you. Yes, then by the end of it, we're going to have a quick closing and I'll ask for quick feedback from you. We're going to end the recording, and you can also, if you want to stay on, you can also ask some more questions after the recording is finished. That's about that. So today we have, as I said, 4 panelists with us today here. The first one that I'm going to introduce is Alexandra Panos, who is an assistant professor of literacy studies at the University of South Florida. Her research focuses on ecological and geographical dimensions of literacy's education. Together with James, which I'm actually going to go back and forth here. Yes, they've worked in a few articles together, so it's a great pleasure to have both of them here today with us because their research is super well aligned with what we're talking about today here. And James D'Amico is a professor of literacy, culture, and language education at Indiana University, and his work focuses on critical literacy and teaching and learning about climate change. Then besides them, we have Olof Sundin, who is a professor at our own Sweden here, and he's a professor of information studies at Lund University, and his research is more around study of media and information literacy, as well as infrastructural meaning making. Then finally, we have Spyros Psihas, sorry if I don't pronounce that correctly. And he's a partner of the Hellenic Network for the Fight Against Poverty and the Center for Lifelong Learning and of Pente University in Athens, as well as an environmental activist. So we have a very nice diversity of profiles here with us today. Again, thank you all for being here with us. So I'm gonna stop my screen right now with sharing, and I'm gonna come back. Sorry, it's a lot of things open, but I hope that I will manage. Yes. Okay, just gonna make one final thing. And all right, so now we're going to start with our questions. And the first question that I would like to ask is to Spyros. Yes, are you all with me? Is that okay? Can I go on? Yeah? Okay. I know the online events are a lot, and we're a lot of people here, so lots of little faces, and I hope we get through. We're going to have a stretch and a little pause for water in the middle of the panel discussion, so don't worry, we'll get there. Yeah, so moving on. The first question is said to Spyros. Again, if I'm not pronouncing correctly, please feel free to correct me. I would like to ask you, how can and how should different actors, including politicians, civil society actors, and so on, work together to counteract climate change misinformation and to move towards a more sustainable future?
Okay, good question. For me, it's an honor to be with you tonight because I see you have so many professors from universities, and it's very nice. Me personally, I'm coming from some ecological from some ecological groups which were active since the 80s. When I was a student at university, I was already member in a grassroots ecological organization with fellows trying to say something about the climate change since then, because most of the things have been said 40 years ago. But unfortunately, you see that the information which was spread out at this period was just something strange that was not easily understandable. And nowadays, this period of time, I was working mainly with socially excluded groups. And it happened that in one project I was involved, we had to discuss how climate change is influencing also the more vulnerable groups, and of course the whole society. Yes, but before coming, I would like just to focus on what happened. This period of time in Greece. Maybe all of you have got some negative information that we had some terrible forest fires in some areas of Greece. Maybe Rhodos, a very nice island. So many people have visited this very nice island, famous from ancient times. Or in North Greece, close to the Turkish border, where we had terrible forest fires which destroyed a big natura area, a big agricultural areas also, and forests not under high protection, but natural areas. And also, we had also forest fires in Attica, just close to the to Athens, and the state, the Greek state, could not manage to stop and in time, etc. So in Greece, and just 2 weeks ago, we had all this heavy rain, these storms in the central Greece, in Thessalia, and Thessalia, which was a lake some million years ago, became again a big lake, and many villages were really totally destroyed, and the people survived being on the roofs of the houses, and hundreds of animals were lost. And now we are in a really difficult situation. So I see this not just to start with something negative, but just to see that now, this period of time, we face reality. If you were saying something about climate change some years ago in Greece, and that the temperature of the planet will get higher for 1.5 degrees something, maybe somebody could tell you, doesn't matter. We will spend less oil during winter time. Okay, but nobody could understand really that climate change means that the climate will be destroyed. We will not have the seasons as we know from our early childhood. That we do not understand, we're not aware that we have terrible problems with agricultural production, etc., etc. And now we see in Greece. And I'm not sure that we really realize. We realize that nature is strong, stronger than us, but I don't know if we realize what we have to do and not to do. I had a general question in my mind that the question is what we have to say to the students in the schools, or if we have to influence the public sector. because in Greece many times I see that the children can respond, or the citizens respond. They recycle, they do something properly, they try to protect an area. And sometimes the public sector do not respond properly and does not play the role that he's determined to play. Of course, there are many discussions about what's the role of the state and the modern state, and etc., etc. But we agree that there is a role that the citizens need safety and security, and there is a main role of the state to offer that, if it is possible, of course. But in the cases I described before, we see that the Greek state could not act. It's like if they were sleeping and suddenly happened something, and at this time, let's mobilize the Greek army and some special forces, etc. But in reality, what happened was that the citizens, the people, it's one video in the Greek media was that a very old man had a boat in a village in the middle of the plain of Thessalia, and with this boat, he saved some 100 people from his village. So we see volunteers. We see that the people were volunteering, and although they were not really organized, they took the initiative to get something, to do something at this point of time, just to manage with this climate disaster, with this disaster for everybody. And they didn't look after their house. They would like to help the neighbors, the children, the old people, etc. So the thing is, what we do before coming to that. Again, I have a question, having in mind the Greek case. You know, I don't know. First of all, you know, I'm speaking about Thessalia. Thessalia, you know, is the central Greece. Maybe, I don't know, you live in the States, etc. I don't know, in Spain. I don't know if you have an idea what is Thessalia. Thessalia is a big area, southern than Thessaloniki and northern than Greece, than Athens. Okay, just to have a feeling. It's a big, big plain where wheat is produced. It's a great, they produce a great percentage of the Greek agricultural production. And, you know, since 40 years ago, I'm coming to a more scientific issue. 40, 50 years ago, all the politicians were promising to the farmers in Thessalia that they will bring water from Acheloos river. Acheloos, maybe you know it from Greek mythology, was a very strong god. In fact, is a very strong river. Okay. So Acheloos is very big, maybe the biggest river in Greece. But it's going on the west side of Greece. So the politicians, they were planning to change the route of the river and take a part of this river, maybe the half, let's say, and send it to Thessalia just to help the farmers to have a bigger, to have productivity in their cultivated areas. The ecologists, many years ago, 40 years ago, they were saying, look, you can use the local water, the local available water supplies from the local rivers, etc. You can make storages, etc., etc., etc. But you know, it was not counting, and at the end, the European Union, which fortunately has some directives, obliged the Greek state to stop this. And for the moment, there are billions spent to make a big dam and collect the water of this river, but it has not finished yet. The dam is there. A wind power and electricity plant is done, but this water is not allowed to come from one side of Greece to the other because it is not allowed according to the directives of the European Union. But these directives, it's not a question only of an ideological point of view about the protection of nature, etc., but there was the other dimension to protect Thessalia from what happened now. Again, we have to see the story from the very beginning. And again, we have to convince the Greek public authorities that the way they are moving is not the right one, because for them maybe the problem is a question of how much money we'll spend to give some big technical companies and make some supplementary works in the rivers, etc. I mean, the climate change, maybe it's an opportunity for more profit for some, and not the big sign that we have to do something altogether as a society. I think that we cannot escape. We cannot escape because we see what's happening in most of the countries of the world, in the States and in Bangladesh, in poor and in rich countries, in North or Central Europe and in South Europe, in North Africa and everywhere. So I think step by step we will go on. I hope we. Yes, I take your time. I take your time. Yes, one more point I would like to. In the 80s, in '86, we had another terrible disaster of the Chernobyl accident. At this time, I remember, I was 25 years old, something. So many initiatives were established in Greece from local people, and they started organizing public discussions about the effects and the danger which is connected with the use of nuclear power, I mean nuclear plants, etc. And at this period of time, we had, many things about nuclear weapons, about. So it was connected with the nuclear plants. And I remember how the citizens, the active citizens, they organized so many initiatives, and they were put this discussion high in the public discussion. I think we have to do something like that now again. Thanks.
Thank you, Spyros. Sorry. Yes, thank you so much for your inputs. I think it's very interesting to hear the perspective of Greece as well. I have heard a few things of Greece as the public opinion shaping as well in regards to a windmill production there, that a lot of the locals weren't so happy with installing them close to them to their houses and so on.
It's true that there are many local initiatives in many areas of Greece that the people are against the installation of wind power generators in the mountains. Greece is the third country in Europe concerning we have most mountains just after Switzerland and Norway. So we can, but the thing is not to put so millions of wind power generators in every protected area, and destroy everything. Because you come in Greece for your summertime, for vacation, etc., provided that Greece is a nice country and there are protected areas and clean sea, etc. So it's another issue, yes. And there are many these the discussions about that, because of course we are in favor of the alternative energy resources, but on the other side, you have to respect some limits.
Exactly. Thank you. I would like to open a little bit the opportunity for the other panelists to add to this question. If you have a different opinion or something to add about the different actors that you believe that could work together to counteract climate change misinformation. No? Nothing?
Well,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, hello.
Yeah. Thank you, Spyros, for your presentation. I was thinking that, of course, it's extremely important to get the politicians along. The problem is, at least from my perspective, that some politicians are not only climate denialists, but also climate obstructionists. And that brings to the topic of how this whole area, existential area, is being politicized in a very dangerous way. And sometimes I think that the most constructive thing we could do is to vote to save the institutions and to promote the institutions.
That's a very good point. And I guess like that's also something that you see different from country to country as well, the power that people think that they have when voting. Because coming from Brazil, I would say I don't feel like my vote has that much power, whether here in Sweden, I see people really believing that their vote has a weight and they can communicate with the politicians more than we feel like we can. So, yes. Thank you so much, both of you. Actually, my next question is for you, Olof, so it's good that you're already there as a speaker. So my question is a little bit two-sided. How would you say that media and information literacy can contribute to shaping strategies for source criticism to count misinformation? And then what is the relevance of it to shaping structures of meaning making, as you put it?
Thank God for you made me prepare for those difficult questions, but thank you very much for being invited and for the questions. I've been studying media and information literacies for many years now, and let's get straight to the point. I'm not always very optimistic about the role of media in information literacy, in the role of countering, for example, climate denialism. But that is something we can get back to. And that's also a paradox, because I still think it's important. So that is the difficult paradox. And I recently wrote a book together with Jutta Heider with the title Paradoxes of Media and Information Literacy, The Crisis of Information. So what makes media and information literacy work then? Well, I would say that the success of media and information literacy, including the evaluation of sources and so forth, is due to if we can establish a few common benchmarks of what kind of information sources should be avoided and what sources should be trusted. And that is something that seems to be more and more difficult, even in Sweden, and for sure in Brazil and many other countries. And if we don't have a shared understanding of these benchmarks, then creating a common literacy in media information across different communities becomes very, very difficult, because it's about trust, and how do you actually teach and educate trust? That is extremely difficult. So many assume that with the goal of media and information literacy is to teach people to quit believing, for example, in conspiracy theories or stop denying climate change. And in this line of thinking, the issue is mainly about, the problem then is mainly about ignorance or lack of knowledge or lack of education. But that kind of thinking is, I think, rooted in a belief that everyone wants to be rational and enlightened, but that's not just the case, as we know, and we've seen many, many times. And besides that, there are, as I said earlier, many strong actors in society and in between society who promote exactly the opposite idea, that climate change is a hoax and so forth. So pushing for a critical outlook without a shared trust in society's sources of knowledge could actually even have negative consequences that I know that you think about. I believe you think about them. So instead of building trust, we might end up fueling more distrust and create a more unstable information environment. So while the intentions of media information literacy are very good, and also I think we should promote them and do what we can, they could also lead us down the path of increased skepticism in a way. And that is something we should be cautious about, particularly we that think that media information literacy can do good. We have to incorporate that inherent problem in the whole idea. It's definitely not a golden key to a bright future. It could be a part of one strategy out of many, of course. So where does this lead then? Yes, I think media and information literacy is important, and the evaluation of sources. But it's definitely not a simple answer to all questions. And media and information literacy, including environmental or eco-literacy, needs to understand the complexity of the notion of information literacy, media and information literacy. And that is difficult. It sounds difficult, and it is difficult. So that was an attempt to answer or comment on your first question. Then maybe a more positive note that regarding this meaning making, the infrastructural meaning making that you were referring to in your question. Well, it's as far as I can see it, we can't deny that our comprehension of the world around us is to a large extent shaped by social media, search engines, recommendation systems, and so forth. And these platforms generate an instant stream of data that forms our knowledge, our belief, our decisions, including the way we understand climate change, I would say. So imagine if you are standing in the middle of this stream and you are being bombarded, if you can use that, well, anyway, by all kinds of information, from news articles, social media posts, advertisements, and so on. And furthermore, this stream, this bombardment is not random. It's being curated by algorithms, by platforms that decides what we see and what we don't see. So, and if you furthermore then add to that kind of mix the power of artificial intelligence and generative IA that is now going to be extremely influential in the potential to distribute and to communicate disinformation in this area. Then you have the kind of a broad picture. So the challenge here then is that we need to understand the hidden gears and levers that control our information landscape, and how search engines decide what to show us. Why does the news story go viral and while another doesn't? And these aren't just academic questions. They are actually essential skills for navigating our digital world that I think they are very important to incorporate in an understanding of media and information literacy. And for example, if you encountering a graph on social media that suggests that climate change is overstated, that there is no actual climate change, it's that kind of graph might seem like it's self-explanatory, and it's definitely very easy to like and share to your friends and communities. But what often remains obscured are the critical contextual factors. How was this data collected, categorized, presented? Who are the stewards of the information? What are the algorithms look like? And so forth. So in the book I referred to earlier, we propose the concept of infrastructural meaning making to describe this type of understanding that I suggest it's important here. It's kind of refers to an awareness of the logics governing our complex information infrastructure. What types of engagement are promoted, discouraged, or even obstructed? what data forms the backbone of these systems, and what intrinsic values are likely embedded in them. So if I trying to bring these two questions you had for me together, I argue that both concepts, the evaluation of sources and critical infrastructural meaning making, needs to be cornerstone of a contemporary understanding of media and information literacy, especially when broaching subjects as vital as the ecology and climate change. So I think I stopped there.
Thank you, Olof. That was very interesting. I'm actually very interested about the fact that you said that sometimes media information literacy can lead to skepticism. And that was a point I hadn't thought about. So that was very interesting. Thank you so much. I would like to open again the talk to the panelists to see if they wanted to add something to that. Yes, Spyros? Go ahead.
Maybe I could help just putting a small question. I was looking the percentage of the people who, when they vote, for example, for the national elections, there is only maximum 10% that they take into account the environmental actor, these issues. It's not so, and maybe more, of course, poverty or income problems or corruption, but 10 or less than 10%. And I was really thinking about that. I don't know what's happening in your country and how you comment on that. Because at the end, we vote for politicians of this kind of, that they have this perception about what to do and not to do. For example, our Prime Minister, just 2 days ago, he said, look, we'll have disasters, so you have to secure, to pay money in your private insurances and secure your houses. It's another approach, which of course is not acceptable at all. But he said this in public.
Yeah.
But we voted for him.
Yes. But I guess there's also different perspectives of the civic society itself in different countries, right? That changes the way that the politicians in a way respond to this kind of disasters, I would guess, right? Thank you, Spyros. Would anyone else like to add on to that?
Maybe I could just say one word more about what you picked up from my presentation. And as a part of my research, I've been following classrooms in their work in schools at upper secondary level. And I've made a lot of interviews, and I remember particularly one interview with a teacher who said, when I asked him, what do you think is most important when you discuss this, the ability to evaluate sources, media and information literacy? And he asked, well, you shouldn't trust anyone. That is what I would like them to understand. And if that is what you bring from school, then it becomes extremely difficult to try to convince someone with expertise or whatsoever, because you don't trust them. So a general lack of trust is, it might sound good to start with, right? You should always question. And yes, you should question, but there is a tipping point when that discourse moves into a direction of totally skepticism or, yeah.
I agree, and hopelessness in a way as well.
Yeah, definitely.
I had a similar situation last week. We had an event about also another project on media and information literacy with high school students, and one of them was saying, you can never believe anything that you read online. The only way to know for sure if that's true is being there. So yeah. I was asking them to evaluate like a fake news. The war in Ukraine is fake, and how would they go about checking that? And he said, well, I would buy a ticket to Ukraine.
May I comment on that?
Yes, please.
That is a very common misunderstanding what this is about. That it's not about evaluating a source. That is about evaluating an epistemic content. That and for example, so you have to trust sources or not trust them. But it's about if you only think you can trust something if you have seen it yourself, then media and information literacy becomes impossible.
It's not even existent, I would say. Thank you so much, both of you. So now, before we go to the next two panelists, I would like to encourage everyone to just take a big stretch and just like, yeah, if you raise your hands up in the air, and you can, of course, I have my background, so you can see my hands, but you can also just move your wrists around, then move your head a little bit, maybe circle the head a little bit and shake your shoulders. Yeah. All good? Are you all feeling good to continue, or do you want to just take a glass of water? Or, yeah? All right. So if we can continue, since we're a little bit late here in the schedule, I will go forward with my next question to James. James, yours is also a very big question. You probably know it because you received the question before. So here I come. In your research, you write about the impact of personal beliefs, values, and political affiliations, as well as factors such as the internet posing its own particular challenges to evaluating sources. How do these factors function together to shape opinions about environmental topics? And do you believe that media and information literacy can help counteract the resulting processes and narratives that come from that? Yeah, that was a thesis in itself.
Yeah, well, these are great questions, and thanks so much for the opportunity to talk with you. And I'll try to pick up on some of the strands that you've laid out, Olof. In terms of the first question, you're asking about how different factors function together to shape our views about environmental topics. I think with any experience or encounter that we have with media, there are three sets of overlapping or mutually reinforcing factors at play. The first set of factors is about us and what we bring to all of our sense making, right? This is our personal beliefs, our values, our emotional investments, our political affiliations, et cetera, that have been shaped by our social locations, right? Our identities and experiences, and all this stuff inside of us. The second set of factors is media itself, online and offline, images, videos, texts, social media platforms, or graffiti on a wall, all this stuff that's in our information world, right? And all of this media is full of perspectives, agendas, desires that attempt to influence us in some way, maybe to entertain us, maybe to make us laugh or cry, maybe to persuade us to think or act in a particular way. And this third set of factors is about the wider context of our human experience. These contexts shape how we understand ourselves, our beliefs and values, and these contexts shape how media is produced and distributed or shared. So for example, when it comes to environmental issues or climate change in particular, these overlapping contexts include, a cultural historical context, right, in which some stories about who we are and how we should live, such as stories about progress, individualism, competition, take precedence over other stories. An economic context that's been dominated by industrial extractive capitalism for the past 2 centuries, but it's also an economic context of technological innovation and creative entrepreneurial problem solving. A political context, and at least in the US, but not solely in the US, that is rife with polarization, gridlock, and an oversized influence of corporate lobbyists representing fossil fuel companies. We have a sociological and psychological context in which we are likely to seek information that confirms our views and expectations and leads us to conform our ideas and actions to be part of groups or tribes. Right? And again, there's a broader media context where misinformation and disinformation can thrive in ways that make it difficult for us to discern fact from opinion, real news from fake, accurate information from misinformation, right? A media context in which not only alternative views are expressed, but alternate realities can thrive. So we have these three mutually reinforcing factors, right? We have us and what we bring. We have media itself and its agendas and perspectives. And we have these overlapping contexts, right? And I think together they function in ways that make it difficult to evaluate information sources. So that leads to the second question, like what can media literacy do? And I think the short answer to the question is it can do a fair amount, maybe even a lot, when it pays close attention, critical attention to these three sets of factors. So for example, when it comes to each of us, we need to critically examine what we are bringing to our encounters with different media, to critically reflect on our beliefs, values, and assumptions. And it's important to note when it comes to reading or viewing media, we are all susceptible to psychological tendencies. We all tend to search for, select, view, and share information that confirms our beliefs, or we gravitate toward information that triggers an emotional response or satisfies an emotional need. We also, all of us, tend to be fiercely loyal to those in our in-group or tribe. We place trust in them, even when there's clear evidence that indicates that it is misguided to do so. So I think careful and critical self-reflection is essential. And in my experience, this is where many approaches to media information literacy have fallen short, frankly. Much more attention in media literacy tends to be given to this second set of factors, which is media itself, right? So in terms of what media information literacy can do, it can continue doing what I think it does best, which is to emphasize the critical analysis of media. When we ask and answer questions like, who's the author and creator of this piece of media? Do they have relevant expertise on this issue or topic? What claims are being made? What evidence is being used to support those claims? What techniques are being used to influence or manipulate me? Are they using loaded words and images and sounds or color to persuade me in different ways? Which voices are included? Which voices or perspectives are omitted? And how might people from different backgrounds and experiences view this piece of media? So again, in my view, this type of analysis has been the backbone of media information literacy, and the challenges with doing this analysis are not going to go away. They're likely going to intensify in an age of artificial intelligence and deepfake videos. So it's important to continue to be vigilant with those kinds of practices. But media information literacy can also attend to this third set of factors, right? These overlapping contexts, because they also merit critical scrutiny. We need to carefully examine the ways in which these contexts, again, historical, cultural, economic, political, et cetera, have affected the production and distribution of any piece of media. And I think one of the best ways to investigate these contexts is through inquiry, posing questions about each of these contexts or questions that cut across contexts. In my recent book, How to Confront Climate Denial, Literacy, Social Studies, and Climate Change with my co-author, Mark Bailden, we outlined a range of potential inquiry questions that could be addressed in and out of classrooms. These are questions like, to what extent are regulatory measures necessary to address climate change? Can an economic system of capitalism adequately address climate change? Can we have prosperity without growth? How do indigenous political and economic models help address climate change? There are also some questions that directly emphasize climate denial. We can ask, where is climate denial a significant problem around the world, and why in these particular contexts, and more so than in another context? We can investigate that. How is climate denial part of my own life, my own family, my own community? And what role has the media played in spreading climate denial, right? And even policy-oriented questions like, should media companies accept fossil fuel advertising dollars? Many of them still do. And questions like, in what ways should social media be regulated to ensure that climate misinformation and climate denial aren't spread? Fortunately, some of these conversations are happening now in the US about the role that the companies have, and these questions about accountability are becoming more prominent in conversations. This is just a small batch of questions to help us examine these overlapping contexts and how they interact with us, what we bring, and media itself. So I'll just end with maybe one additional point about making sure that we integrate individual and collective sense-making with information literacy when working with media. I think each of us actually needs time and tools to individually process information. And we need opportunities for meaningful dialogue and deliberation across our differences. And I think this speaks to one of your points, Olof. There's so much information that's coming directly at us, these streams where we are, and a lot of it is unwanted information, right? This is just it's getting thrown at us. We can try to choose different feeds, but it's coming at us, right? It's really hard to maneuver our way around it. We need actually to have some agency and choose what we really want to view, and we need time to process it before we are told what everyone else thinks about it, right? Before we get in what everyone else interpretations about what happened, we need to actually process that ourselves. And then we need to be able to participate in conversations through dialogue and deliberation. So.
Yes, thank you, James. That was a very different perspective. Of course, the individual aspect of self-reflection is something that we don't really talk much about, in at least what I've been working with, media and information literacy. We, of course, talk about the perspective of the writer itself, himself or herself, and how their perspective and their background influence the kind of information they are writing, but not how you perceive that. So that's a very interesting perspective to it all. Thank you for adding that. And about so I would say, sorry, I'm receiving some messages. So I would open now the call again for the panelists. Do you have something else to add to what James said, or collaborate a little bit more? Yes, Olof, go ahead.
No, maybe I could say something. Thank you very much, James. Yeah, I agree with I think everything you said. It's I think this question of self-reflection fits very well with my ideas of infrastructural meaning making, because this stream we were referring to, both of us, it's to some extent created by the platforms and their algorithms, etc. But it's also to some extent created by us, by the way we like, by the way we share, by the way we search, and so forth. And to be critically aware of our doings online, how that actually transform the information we access, it's one way of being critical there. And it's sometimes I refer to a change that not that long ago we tended to search for information, but today the information search us and find us to a much higher degree than before.
Thank you, Olof. James, would you like to respond to that, or would you like to add something else?
Yeah, I think it speaks to one of your earlier points too, Olof, about trust, right? And thinking about this erosion of trust, not only in media but in institutions across the board, right? Whether it's in science, trust in government, trust in journalism, right? So it raises questions about how do we rebuild trust? Because trust isn't static. It's not, I just trust this and then you're done. It's this process of rebuilding, and what are the mechanisms to do that? And I think that's a real fruitful point to talk further about. Maybe we'll have time later in the conversation to do that.
Perfect, thank you.
I just wanted to add that Olaf and James, the things that you're talking about with trust, and Julia, what you shared in your experiences recently is something that comes up constantly when I'm working with my undergraduate students, and when I talk with teachers and the students that they teach from kindergarten through 12th grade here in the US. And so in response to that, I've explicitly started discussing that idea of, well, who can't, where, centering trust in the conversations about media literacy beyond just doing the things that we know in media literacy circles are helpful and effective, doing the kinds of work that James was talking about, and certainly considering the ways that changes are happening. But having those kinds of scary conversations where people are saying, well, there's nothing to trust, it's done. sorry, I can't do it, I won't do it, had me sort of go, oh, that's okay. we're going to center that when we talk about the media we're encountering and where it comes from, and identify things that we do trust and discuss why and discuss what that means, and use just that notion of trust as the moment for individual reflection and then shared dialogue around why we might have different answers to that. But I think that that's particularly important and needed, and the students that I work with find it really valuable to center that idea.
Yeah. Thank you, Alexandra. That's a very good point. I also think it's important to just at least establish a way. I mean, you don't have to trust anyone in the way, like, of course, if you don't trust anyone, it's problematic, but it's not about exactly that, right? But it's about being able to read the information in a way that is meaningful to you, and that makes sense to the information you want to get out as well, and that you know that the information that you're getting is probably not the full answer and probably not the full reality, and that you're also not reading it in the full reality of itself because of your own personal beliefs, as Jane was bringing up. Yeah, I would guess that is a very interesting point of view. Thank you. Yes, Spyros, you also want to add something?
Thanks. Just because we discussed about trust, we have also to trust somehow the scientists. I see that because these days in Greece there was a small conflict between the government, the prime minister, and the scientists of the Greek observatory, the Athens observatory, which is an extremely high quality research institution. The people who work there, they are the best. They had sent warnings about what will be the problems in Thessalia and in Greece with these terrible rains which happened during this typhoon, and nobody trusted them. So they didn't react because they considered that they can say what they want. They are scientists, okay, yes, but we're not obliged to take into account what they say. So it's exactly the opposite of what we try to say and to do, and to promote the right information in time, to influence the people, to promote critical thinking, active citizenship, etc., etc. So you see that sometimes we don't want to listen even the most detailed and accurate scientific approach. It's unbelievable, but it happens. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yes, it does happen. Thank you so much, Spyros. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, I have my finals panelists now, Alexandra. The next one is for you. Yours is not as long, the question, but it's very much meaningful, I believe. So, in your research, you use the term stories we live by. What do you mean by this? And how can beneficial stories we live by help us counter misinformation about climate change?
Thank you. Really grateful to be here with everyone and thinking about these, the folks that have come before, all you're saying. So I think it's a really important question for a number of reasons. And I think I'm taking a slightly different tack to this conversation about media literacy and misinformation. So like, I think there's gonna be a little whiplash, but I hope y'all stick with me. I've been thinking about the idea of stories we live by in work with English language arts and literacy teachers here in Florida in the US for the past few years. And James and I have been thinking about this concept for a bit longer in terms of bringing media and climate literacies to work with teachers for a while now. And it really came, for me at least, from a call by one of our professional organizations here in the US in literacy studies that asked us to use all of the tools of language and communication to combat the climate crisis, which is inclusive from my perspective with this spread of mis and disinformation. But Stories We Live By comes from ecolinguistics, which in particular, the work of Aaron Steibe, who's at the University of Gloucestershire. He has a wonderful free online class that's really helpful related to this topic. But that concept I find powerful because it starts with the premise that we're all part of and contribute to the stories, including media, that circulate within our practices as part of our culture. At many levels. So like individual culture, geographically bound culture, political culture, things like that. And of particular importance from my perspective is that these stories we live by are often invisible. They live hidden in many places in our media and in our actions at many levels or our inactions. And these stories and actions, or these texts and actions, tell a story about what is of value in a given culture. And by highlighting them and thinking about them as stories that circulate, that we're a part of, that maybe we can't always see, we can help make them visible in our work, wherever that work might be. I think this is salient when it comes to issues related to climate justice and misinformation, because misinformation holds the power because of different stories, which undergird like the flow of misinformation to do damage to our ability to address climate crisis and issues of injustice politically, socially, culturally, through education, through our economic systems, et cetera. So misinformation comes from a number of stories about the world, including like really big ones. Ones that James and I like to cite a lot is the idea that humans are the center of the universe. This is a story that implies that we shouldn't make changes to our lives and systems to confront climate crisis, and misinformation can prey on a story like that, and people are really susceptible to it. The concept also helps me address the issue that climate crisis needs to be visible to literacy teachers who, at least here in the United States, have not had training in climate education, who often feel very out of their element in addressing it with students, and often live in political environments where climate denial and climate obstruction is pervasive, like it is here in Florida. So in lots of places for teachers, it feels beyond their ability and even dangerous to address issues of climate change and social justice and misinformation in the same breath. So this idea of Stories We Live By is really helpful because I think it brings a wider lens that literacy teachers and English language arts teachers and people who teach story and narrative for a living can latch onto. And it can be really intimate because it can connect to the kinds of stories we want to be living in the world around us. The idea of a beneficial story, one that doesn't do damage like a story that promotes misinformation does. So a beneficial story would contribute to things like planetary stability, equity, and justice, and a sense of belonging for all living things. And those are the kinds of things that we need right now, which brings me back to Florida. I'm coming back around here. So Florida is particularly vulnerable, just as Spyros, you were saying about Greece. I'm sure folks are aware of the climate crisis kinds of events that happen here, hurricane impact, sea level rise. We're also exceptionally vulnerable to issues of political interference in our education systems right now. Teachers face felony charges and loss of licensure for teaching things that are not within the curriculum or have been banned. But they've been using, even so, the idea of Stories We Live By to positively address climate crisis in their communities by using place-based stories. So returning to what's happening here in Florida to help them confront the kinds of stories that promote misinformation and directly address topics within issues of climate justice like extractivism or hurricane impacts to frontline communities to sort of pave the way for misinformation to not take hold, I think is how they would talk about it. So for example, teachers and I last year came together to discuss climate justice and literacies, and we looked at a series of media about extraction and then talked about how to bring such media to their students. They talked about how powerful it would be to look at communications and media from companies like British Petroleum and interrogate them using media literacy tools. But then they brought forward the idea that they would need to also talk about the last major oil spill that happened in our region, the Deepwater Horizon from 2010, And given it was 2010, 13 years ago, their students aren't going to remember that. So they believe that a beneficial story for students that might help combat misinformation from oil companies would be to supply them with local stories of the impact of extraction. And those would resonate because they live on the Gulf of Mexico where it took place. And they wanted to tell students a story of memory as an antidote to misinformation. Another teacher I work with who lives and works in a diverse rural county on the Gulf of Mexico as well, last year following the devastating Hurricane Ian, which killed at least 155 people, asked students to consider how hurricanes harm our communities unevenly and create a story to help people see these impacts in new ways. Stories about hurricanes dissipate pretty quickly, just like the hurricanes do when they hit land, actually. And new buildings get built by wealthy people in what Naomi Klein has called disaster capitalism. We saw it particularly after Hurricane Katrina. And my friend Kate thought that asking students to tell the stories of their communities and the kinds of things they experienced would dispel misinformation that tells people that coastal living is equitable and immune from climate impacts, and the kinds of stories that Florida tells about ourselves in the media. Her students wanted the stories of flooding to their homes to be known and wanted to demand that more be done to make their communities safe and secure for the people who live there now. And Kate and her students wanted youth stories to overpower the pressures and greed of disaster capitalism, which is a perpetuator of misinformation. So to conclude, right now, I guess what I'm thinking about most is how to use the power of place-based and youth-driven stories we live by to combat misinformation in creative ways, even when it's really challenging to do so. And in our work together, another teacher, Morgan, has written that stories are our survival guides, which in itself is a beneficial story about how to navigate the climate crisis. And I think if we think about ways to help educate or share stories with students that directly confront misinformation beyond just through media literacies as we know them now, and that intersects with their lives and where they live, we can do some of this work in classrooms, even in contentious places, and support the youth who are really going to lead us in the long term anyway. So, thank you.
Well, thank you, Alexandra. That was super interesting. I think I really like the idea of the stories we live by. That personally resonates with me quite a bit, especially from the educational background that I come from as well. And Naomi Klein was always on the reading list as well in my master's. So that is very interesting. I actually like a lot the idea of the stories, a way to count stories to combat misinformation, because as all of us have been discussing today up to now, we're bombarded all the time with so many sources of information and new information also all the time, that it's really easy to forget about things that happened, even if it is recently. And also the idea of the perception of what is recent has changed so much nowadays. So
such a good point.
Yeah.
The frequency has changed, yes.
Exactly. My parents tend to say that if I say, oh, that movie is very old, and they're like, oh, but it's 2 years old. We have older movies. So it is changing a lot, this perception. And I think this way of bringing up local stories to say, no, this cannot be forgotten because this happened here, and that's your connection with what happened. I think it's a very great point. Thank you so much. Yes, Spyros?
I have to join in 1 minute another seminar about the vulnerable groups I'm working with. So thanks for everything. We will be in touch through Mrs. De Figu, with who I'm cooperating years and years. So I am totally available, and maybe to introduce you more specialists, because I am just an active citizen. I'm not exactly an environmentalist, but I have worked with environmental education and so on. So I have this personal experience. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for contributing.
Because in half minute I have to join.
Of course, please go ahead. And thank you so much once again for joining. It was a fantastic contribution from your side as well.
Not fantastic, but helpful. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a nice evening.
Thanks.
All right. Would anyone from the panelists also like to add to what Alexandra has shared before we move on to the general questions?
Yeah, I'll
Yes.
just add that yeah, I'm always inspired by these stories, Alex, of the teachers and who you're working with in Florida, and it's a reminder that these bigger ideas about stories we live by, or even conversations about climate justice or ecological justice, are always grounded in particular places, and so getting better understandings of those particular places through the voices of the participants in those places is really central. And I think that's what's really powerful about what you're doing.
Thanks, James. I appreciate it. I think that when I think about these flows that you and Olof were talking about, I think about people actually standing on the ground where they live, like feet in sand or feet in dirt or feet in water or, feet in mud, feet, water up to our necks trying to breathe. And so I really believe that like we have to bring the specificity to the important kinds of conversations that are happening at a higher level about infrastructure, because when we go to work with people, their feet stand somewhere, even while we're in these global flows of media that will never stop, it seems. So yeah.
No, I
And it
guess.
shifts.
Yeah, go ahead.
One more thing. And I think it shifts conversations, or at least it maybe enlarges the possible conversations around, identity and experience, right? These ideas that we are aligned with a particular political identity, or even gender, race, socioeconomic background, et cetera. Those big identities that are really crucial and inform our sense making, obviously. But there's also the identities of having had an experience together in a community that helps dispel the energy that's invested in these other identities. So I think that's really important aspect of the work too. That we have common ground, we have shared experiences, right? So if we're going to rebuild trust, getting back to your earlier point too, Olof, like this process needs to come through conversations and shared experiences, and in this sense, shared struggle towards something. That's how we rebuild trust.
Olof, do you want to jump
Yeah, I
in?
just wanted to say thank you very much, Alexandra. I think that was very uplifting to hear your positive stories coming from a state from which we hear so much negative news regarding school education and so forth. So thank you very much.
Trying to find them, Olof. This doesn't always feel uplifting, but I'm trying to find them. So glad that they resonate.
Amazing. Yes, thank you all so much. That was very, very interesting. And I hope that everyone is still with us and enjoying the conversation. I have actually now some time that I would like to give to all of you to give some final reflections and some closing thoughts. And while doing so, I would like to ask you to maybe answer a few of the questions, or like not a few, but any point that you want to add to your final reflection. For instance, what do you think are the most important tools and strategies to prevent or counteract climate denialism or misinformation? What do you believe is the overall role that media and information literacy plays in climate action? And again, what are the main challenges of engaging with misinformation of climate change? Those were the three aspects that we would like to just bring into the table for the final conclusion of this panel discussion before we open up for the questions for the rest of the participants. Yeah, maybe we can start with you, Alex, since you're there as well, which if you would like, of course.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity to be in this conversation. I really appreciate the scope of the panel. I think it was really helpful. I guess for me, the kinds of tools and strategies that we've been using, I agree with James, need to be continued to be used. We're going to have to adapt them, obviously, as the media infrastructure shifts underneath our feet. And I guess I'm trying to explore and learn to follow where the climate crisis and political crises that so many of us face around the world related to right-wing nationalism and authoritarian regimes intersects with these issues, and follow that, and then be adaptive in my own inquiry as an educator and as a scholar. I think that our ability to address the needs of media literacies in a changing world, both media-wise and as the impacts of climate crisis grow, mean that we have to be adaptive in this way as well. And I just have continued to find that what is most impactful and where I can go is by working with people where they stand on this living earth. And so like returning to where we are in the living earth and what's happening there, while keeping our eyes up always to the global crisis, is part of media literacies that I don't know that we always know how to deal with, just because things are so different. So we can't tell people exactly what to do. And we like, questions and heuristics that support us, but not everything can be universal. So allowing that to be part of the inquiry and part of our work with the people we're in community with, I think is the important next steps for me, and where I try to take my work and grow. So.
Right. Thank you so much. Yes. Olof, would you like to follow the discussion?
I can try. Thank you. Well, it's as I said before, your questions are really demanding, and it's possible to give a straight, easy answer. But to start with, I would like to refer back to what I said earlier, that maybe the most important thing we can do, having in mind the different cultures and contexts we all come from, is to engage in politics in order to kind of protect the institutions from policy or lobbyism or whatever, the corporate takeover. And because a lot of the climate denialism, or rather climate obstructionism, comes from leading politicians. And that is extremely problematic when you ask, how could we work with politicians to solve the problem? So having said that, there are, of course, things we can do in other ways. And I think Alexandra's way of addressing and grounding these difficult topics in the everyday life and in local communities are an extremely interesting way to move forward. And what I would like to pick on specifically when it comes to media and information literacy and what we teach about is a topic that we have talked about, many of us here today, and that is first of all the role of trust, and the way we could work, what we can do to kind of increase trust in a way, and on a local level, so to speak, and that is, you can't really teach people trust. That's extremely difficult, at least, and could create a backlash but one way, when we talk about trust in sources, or trust in journalism, or trust in science, one way is to trying to promote an understanding of how, for example, journalism are made. What is quality journalism? How is quality journalism made? What is science? What is good science? And sometimes we refer in media literacy, information literacy, just about an article or a paper or a blog post, but we don't in the same way focus on the whole process of how that kind of information, if you can use that word, is created in order to promote an understanding of it's not just to make up things. But I know it's not the only solution, and it's not definitely not this golden key, but it could be one way. And also to make people understand the difference between assessing content and assessing sources, because there is this widespread belief that media literacy, information literacy, is about criticizing the content of something. And I mean, I'm a humanities scholar. I don't understand natural science articles in detail. I can't assess them. It's about trusting science in that way. And but if we refer to it's about content, then it's so difficult, because there are so very few topics in life that I for sure could say that is right or that is wrong. I'm very much interested in football or soccer. I could say a few words about that. I know a lot of things about football, but I don't know the details of natural sciences or medicine or vaccine science or whatsoever. That's a question about trusting an institution. It's about trusting secondary knowledge, if you like. Yeah, that was my attempt to bring something into the discussion.
Thank you, Olof. Yeah, and I agree. Yeah, there's only so much you can be an expert on, right? Yes. Thank you. James, would you like to close?
Sure. I guess I would start with kind of building off one of your points too, Olof, about politics. You know, in school settings, if we think of schools as laboratories for democracy, then what happens in schools should be built around students engaging in democratic practices, dialogue, conversation across differences, evaluating arguments and perspectives, and deliberating proposals and policies, and deciding courses of action. Right? If we have opportunities to do that in schools and out of schools, the idea then we cultivate these skills, right? So then when we're in the voting booths or we're engaged in town hall council meetings and so forth, that we can enact these practices. So I think in terms of the tools and strategies we have, we need to do what we know how to do that. Theres no shortage of books and resources about how to promote dialogue in classrooms, and also there's no shortage of books and resources about how to do media information literacy. You know, the questions, tips, suggestions, the templates, and so forth. I've worked on a bunch of those. Alex and I have worked on a lot of those and others. So I do think there's room for thinking differently about tools, maybe, and maybe we do need different tools. This is my own bias because I'm in the midst of creating a new mobile application and a platform to read information critically. So that's been my world for the past few months in particular. But I think there's some hope there in terms of tools that actually do both things, help us evaluate information for ourselves, and then really connect with others in a meaningful way about, it's partly about trust, but I also think, trust has been politicized, even that term, that, it might even, more a useful term might be just be respect, like that we have respect for certain institutions or certain people because of the work they do. And maybe that's, maybe it's just a semantic difference, but maybe it's a difference. It makes a difference, I don't know, but in how we think about, because ultimately we need to be able to have conversations with each other. We don't have to agree on everything, but we need some shared understandings in order to really engage with the challenges.
Right. Thank you, James. Yes, I agree. There's only so much that can be questioned sometimes. Otherwise, there is no point for starting a discussion as well, I guess.
Yeah, can I just add one more point?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead. We're actually very good at time.
Okay, good on time. Good, thanks. I do think, and this is the argument Mark Belden and I make in our book about climate denial, we really do think it needs to become a priority. We need to be able to target, identify, investigate climate denial. And that's ultimately about holding fossil fuel companies and all the other industries, public relations companies, law firms, financial institutions that aided and abetted them in the past, and they continue to do so. We need to hold them accountable, and if we don't do that kind of investigation of those practices, their tactics and techniques, they continue to morph in different ways. They're so well-funded and creative and so ahead of the curve in terms of denial tactics and techniques. If we don't make that a priority in some way, then it's really hard to kind of get ahead of this. And one of the ways we do that, obviously, is we hold people accountable. We can take them to court. We see hundreds now lawsuits around the US and around the world that are holding companies accountable for their past actions and their current ongoing practices. But we also challenge them by doing the work that Alex and her teachers are doing. We challenge denial by promoting these eco-justice oriented stories that challenge those stories, those more destructive stories that we're living by. We can challenge them. We challenge them in those practices by promoting these stories.
Thanks, James. I would love for us to have more time to talk a little bit more about eco-justice. It would have been an incredible discussion as well. But I also think it's important for us to discuss some pathways to go against institutionalized denialism that I feel like is getting stronger, specifically in some environments. And I think that's something that is both dangerous and specifically dangerous, I would say. Yes, thank you so much, all of you. It's been such an interesting discussion, and I would love to have more time to discuss even more. Right now, I would like to open up the discussion to all of you. So you can either just raise your hands, unmute yourselves, and ask the question directly to the panelists, or you can write them on the chat, and we'll be sure to ask them out loud as well. We already had one comment before that says that it seems that Jane's insights can point to how one's position on climate change is a reflection of one's identity or identities, rather than one of scientific knowledge, which I believe was such a great point. So thank you for the contribution. And yeah, would you like to comment on that, James?
Yeah, I think it, partly gets back to Alex's work too, right? In terms of how we view identity and what identities are most important to people. And the more that we can broaden the conception of identities that people hold, to encourage or invite other ways of thinking about identity, especially place-based identities, where there's a shared commitment to whatever the issue might be, and shared experience, that if we can emphasize those identities, we're in a better position to have conversations across difference and so forth.
Thank you. Madeline, you have a question?
Yes, my question is in part directed at Olof and in part at James, because Olof, you mentioned the amount of information and the influx of data that we get online, and James, you talked about, or you mentioned different actors, political decision makers, educators, individuals that are or can be involved in climate denialism, but also in countering that. So my question to the two of you would be, where you see the main, maybe not the main responsibility, but in the short term, the greatest potential for success? Is it more individuals that are left on their own device to figure out for themselves what to do? Is it the responsibility of educators to teach people how to critically evaluate sources and information and deal with the amount of it? Or do we need political decision makers to put in place regulations and laws and structures to help people deal with this?
Well, maybe I could start, James. Yeah, it's a very good question, of course. I think we need both at the same time. And it's also interesting before to listen to you, James, when you talked about holding companies accountable, because I think that is the way you make changes in the US. You go to court And in a European context, I'm not a political scientist, but I think it's slightly different in Europe. You could do that as well, I guess, but I think it's more, well, I'm on deep water here, but I think it's a difference where in Europe, at least in Northern Europe, you will rather go through politicians maybe than to court. But going back to your question, I think you need to do both at the same time. You have to admit that there are certain limitations in what you can do with media and information literacy, and but still they are, what you do could be very, very important if you do it right. But you have to take in the complexity in it's not easy. It's a very complex and difficult arena you move around. And but if you do that, I think media and information literacy can make a change. But when it comes to denialism, I'm not sure that media and information literacy could change someone who denies climate change, for example. But there are many in between that are not deniers, but maybe I just don't have the understanding of it. Maybe those are the ones you are that is possible to reach, the deniers, or even the obstructors, that I would like to say, because sometimes I think deniers is not the right word, because they're not just denying things. Maybe they even know it's true, but they are actually actively obstruct solutions or work against climate change. So in short, I think we need to do both.
Yeah, I agree with Olof. You know, it's clearly an all hands on deck kind of situation in terms of the work that needs to be done. I also think that as educators, you know, teachers and working with students in classrooms in particular, you know, if we're building from the interests and needs of students, we know it's an increasing number of students. Again, I'm speaking of the U.S. context, but I think it applies to many other countries. Increasing number of students who care about climate change and want it to be taught in schools. They want to engage with these ideas, and a fair amount of that is framed through the psychological challenges, eco-anxiety, eco-grief that young people are experiencing, and more willing to talk about it. There's more and more research around that. So given that there's an increased interest and concern about climate change among children and youth, you know, then in part we're responding to them rather than we have to go teach them these things. It's always going to be a relationship, like in the classroom, in terms of what students are bringing, and then how teachers can help, you know, students use different kinds of tools and create opportunities for them to engage with these ideas.
I just want to add, I was talking with a colleague yesterday, and we were discussing how complex confronting and addressing climate denial is depending on where you live as well. And he was in Pennsylvania, and there's still so much fracking that goes on in Pennsylvania, and, you know, families' livelihoods come from, so many children's parents have livelihoods that are directly connected to industries that contribute to the climate crisis. So like here in Florida, tourism is a major one, in Pennsylvania, the oil industries, et cetera. So it creates a lot of complexity, but when you can turn it and have those relationships, James, as you were talking about, I think that there's more possible. But yeah, I just wanted to add that adds wrinkles.
Thank you. Yes, we have a question from Angelos now.
Sure. Hello from me. First of all, thanks to all the speakers for your points. I think it was a very interesting conversation. To give you a bit of context, and hopefully you can hear me okay. I've been involved in the climate action space for a few years. This is at UN level, so I participated at COP26, COP27. I'm now preparing at COP28 in Dubai, which is forecast to be quite a challenging one for obvious reasons. And I wear several hats in the space. One is through the World Federation of Engineering Organizations. I represent engineers in climate action and policy advocacy. And the second is I lead a youth action group for the energy transition of the Commonwealth, which is essentially a union of 56 states that have a certain relationship with the old British Empire. So I'm glad to see that we have a lot of representation on this panel from the global north. So I'll try to give a bit of a perspective from the global south, given that the other fellow Greek that was on the panel left early. Generally, the awareness that we have around climate and the climate issue differs quite a bit between the global north and the global south. For instance, as Spyros was saying earlier, we had in Greece the largest fire in the history of Europe. Something similar was happening in Canada at the same time. Same situation in Hawaii, France, Spain, and a few weeks later we had a massive flood in Greece, which destroyed, I think, 30% of our agricultural yield for the next 5 years, and also killed 2,000 people in Libya, while we had an earthquake in Morocco with a few thousand dead as well. So that's the experience we have with climate change in the global south, and this is just at the equator, right? The more south you go, the less aware people are about the problem, the more significant the issues. Now, when it comes to awareness of the problem, I've spoken to several high-level people about what the issue is, and I can say that the people that make decisions for big fossil fuel companies or for governments that run based on fossil fuel economies are very aware of what the issue is. Now, their perspective on the matter is that we'll have, I don't know, some sort of new magic technology to solve the problem down the line, or, we'll just figure it out on the way. And I agree that might be a possibility to a certain extent. And this is where education comes in, because you need, people like Alexandra to be working with students and all of these things to build the capacity to allow for such innovation to happen. The problem with this is that it takes time, and we don't have 2 decades for these students to grow up and become scientists and eventually change the economic models of like the Shells, BPs, and Chevrons of the world. It's going to be too late. Which brings me to my question. I'm not going to speak too long, even though I could for quite a while on this topic, right? Which is around the awareness of on the issue in the global north. So I'm not directing this to anyone in particular, but when you speak to people from North America, from Scandinavia, from Northern Europe, I'm currently based in the UK, and unfortunately it also applies to the presidency of COP26, they don't seem to think that it is as urgent of an issue as it really is, because they don't experience the effects firsthand, like Greece, Hawaii, and a bunch of other places did this year. 2023 was a very difficult year for a lot of places around the globe. So my question is, how can we fix that? How can we actually, one of you spoke about your student, I think was you, Julia, who wanted to book a ticket to Ukraine to check that there's bombs falling in the country, to then come back and say, yeah, there's actually a war going on. So how can we, being all in the space, convince a student in Norway or Sweden or somewhere in the north of the US who doesn't see any change, like practical change, and maybe he doesn't have the skills to witness it either, because a lot of people confuse climate with weather, right? How can we actually provide this perspective to somebody that doesn't experience it firsthand? So yeah, thanks.
So Florida is in the US and in the global north, but we are also on the equator. So we are experiencing major climate impacts consistently, nonstop. When you said something about the output of agriculture in Greece, I immediately thought about how Hurricane Ian last year created a huge impact on our agriculture here in Florida. I think only 30% as well. I think it was like 45% maybe of what we intended to output will be leaving. So we have a different situation because we're experiencing the impacts like much of the global south is, or the equator is, right? But what happens in the US, and I can only speak to the US, I'm not going to try to go elsewhere, deep waters, as Olof said, is that we are increasingly seeing that Republican folks or people who lean conservative are increasingly being drawn towards climate denial and refusal of understandings of climate science. And Florida has been leaning further and further right and further into conservative spaces. So it's an interesting mix of experiences, and it's part of why I'm trying to understand, even in real time, how children that are growing up in conservative spaces and places that vote Republican and vote conservatively consistently, but are also experiencing massive climate impacts, how teachers are processing that, because it's unsafe to bring up climate denial and climate change often, but it's also lived experience. And what I'm finding is that when it's lived experience, people can talk about it. I don't know, as you said, there's time that has to take place to see what changes that can make. But young people here are very concerned and are doing lots of things. And so I don't know, I don't know what the solution is, but I just know that I'm trying to pay attention and talk about it as often as possible. And hopefully folks like you who go talk to all the movers and shakers can take stories that help them see things a little differently, and might create connectivities between the experiences of the global south and the global north as more and more overlap takes place, or maybe recognizing the equator as a different space that needs to be understood slightly differently as we begin this decline.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to that. And thanks for your question, and thanks for the work that you're doing. I think when it comes to teaching about climate change, like, okay, so if climate change is going to be in the curriculum, what do we do with it? How do we teach about it? What does that look like? And I think this is where it's just essential to think about teaching climate change is equivalent to teaching climate justice, because we can't talk about climate change without talking about climate justice. We know the climate change effects can compound existing injustices. We know that a greater occurrence of heat waves and droughts and fires and floods and problems of food and water scarcity and habitat loss and the forced migration of climate refugees, they're all disproportionately impacting vulnerable populations who are least responsible for climate change. And that's where the global north and global south distinction is really important, right? Because it's disproportionate countries are in the global south who are least responsible for climate change, but they're bearing the brunt of the effects. But that's also happening in the global north, right? We see that inequity in the global north too, in terms of communities that are more adversely impacted, and which communities have the resources to rebuild and which ones don't, and so forth. So we see that inequity playing out both at the national level or within the global north countries, and we see it at the larger scale in the global north and global south. So if we teach climate change and we understand climate change not just about climate science, but we think of it as a socio-scientific topic, then we can talk about climate change, or we need to talk about climate change in terms of climate justice. So I think that's one way to start having those conversations. And the other, again, I think, is to really, we got to target these tactics and techniques of climate denial. We got to call them out. We have to just, find ways to resist that type of manipulation that's happening, right? And then promoting those eco-justice or ecological justice in response to that.
And could I give a question back to you, Angelo, because coming from Greece, where you have had these enormous, devastating fires, not just this year but many years now, has the public discourse changed? Has there been a movement that has created a change on the political level? For sure, there are a lot of young people that are engaged, but in the general public.
Look, the truth is I've lived away from Greece for 12 years. years. I'm a British citizen. I'm based in London. You know, it's not that I can get a feel of what, you know, people say in the coffee shops and in the streets and all of these things, and whether that involves climate change or not. I can talk to you about the UK, which was the COP26 president. They hosted it in Glasgow. We were doing a really good work spearheading the climate action movement up until, I think it was a month ago, where our prime minister decided to sign a multi-billion deal for new fossil fuel extractions in the North Sea. And a couple of weeks later, it came out to the news that he, similar to an ex-president of the US, had vested interests through various companies in the field to get those licenses through and get contracts signed and all of these things. So even though we are building momentum globally, and I think the critical mass of awareness for the urgency of climate change is shifting in the right direction, we're battling against big profits and big corporations ultimately. And this is a risk because for many reasons, but I think I'll stick with two. The first reason is that there is so much money and capital and resource available in existing industries that it's very hard to take talent away from them. What do I mean? If a young person is really pro-sustainability, but he cannot support himself, so he really needs to find a job and some, you know, an amount of money to pay his rent and all of these things, fossil fuel companies can pay a lot higher salaries just for that. They also pay a lot more money in marketing and, you know, influencers on social media and affecting public opinion in the directions that's to their profits. So that's one. There's a significant gap in finance between the existing industries and the green sustainable industries we need to transition to. And this is not just when it comes to, you know, fossil fuels and the energy sector, it's also mobility and transport, infrastructure, construction, all of these things. This is number one. And number two is around awareness, knowledge, misinformation, and what we've been discussing today. I think misinformation finds fertile ground when there's lack of knowledge generally. So if somebody doesn't have an educated opinion on a particular subject, then he's an easy target. You know, he's an easy victim of a catchy headline online or something like this that will just attract his attention for 10 seconds and then he can click away and move on with his life. And then that's his opinion for the rest of the day or the month or whatever. So I think there's a responsibility that sits with all of us and the scientists and the engineers in the space to be louder, because it's not that we're going to stop these streams of information that you talked about earlier from going to people, but we definitely need to clean them up and increase the right streams of information that we want to be directing towards people, right? And to close off, and I think coming from an engineering background myself, this is, because I can see Ms. De Figu wants to speak as well, I can see the core of the problem being the difficulty of science, people from a science background to communicate what they want to say effectively. So, you know, if an engineer comes on a job, his task is to take us from A to B, that's his report done, it's off to the client, that's his scope complete. You know, he can move on to the next report and the next problem to solve. And same applies for scientists, because inevitably we are very technical people. You know, we're tasked with a thing, with a problem, we solve the problem, we go on to the next one. But it's that lack of quality EQ, you know, people skills, whatever, that's letting a lot of room to be occupied by misinformation and all these catchy headlines and all that. Like, science is boring ultimately, and it's not, it's not how it should be, in my opinion. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Angelos. That was such a great contribution.
I would like to give an answer to Olof of what he asked about Greece and the recent fires and what people think. Actually, for the fire that we had in northern Greece, a big fire that burned a very big space and place, in in the coffee houses in Greece and the television shows, not the news, but before the news, the shows before news, they are 100% sure that the fires were started because of illegal immigrants who come through Turkey from northern Greece. So they dislike us because we do not open up the doors for illegal migration. So they, with the help of the Turkish government and the decision of the Turkish government, they decided to burn us up. So misinformation, or the other thing as Spyros mentioned earlier, climate change, okay, we are discussing for many, many years that there is a rise in the temperature. So people would say, okay, if I spend a bit more money every summer month, I would put on the air condition and there is no problem. I'll solve the problem like that. There is a lot to be done in Greece about misinformation and wrong information about climate change.
Thanks, Athanasia. Yes, well, we're approaching the end of our webinar. I would like also to encourage you to stay in touch. If you would like to hear more about the project, or maybe get access to what we've been saying here today, or connect to the panelists, if you're also open to that. Now we have Olof and James left here as well. I do have one final thing. I shared a link with all of you for a quick feedback. It's not a huge thing, it's just for us to improve. And here you have the emails of the main project coordinators of the project in each partner country. So please feel free to write them down and get in touch with us if you would like. With that, I would like to thank all of you once again for the great discussion. It's been such a pleasure, and I've really learned a lot today, and I hope that all of you as well. And yeah, I would love to stay in touch. So please contact me if you would like to stay in touch as well. And I hope to see you all around.